Okay.
All right, it's 5:15, so just to be respectful of everybody's time, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to start by introducing myself and our team here, so that you know who we all are, and you know, as we direct questions to different members of our team. I'm Anne Marie Townsend. I'm the city manager. And Charlie, do you want to introduce yourself? I'm going in order on my screen. So
I'm Charlie O'Donnell. I'm the city engineer.
Lieutenant Azzato,
I'm Jim Azzato, Lieutenant with the Police Department.
Rick,
Rick Melendez, Department Manager of Maintenance.
all right. Dennis, do you want to introduce yourself and our IPS colleagues? You're muted, Dennis.
All right, Dennis Crawford, Parking Enforcement Supervisor, and I have with me Randy Lassner from IPS. They're here from California to help out.
So IPS,
Hello.
just so everybody knows, it they're the company that we use for our meters and our parking enforcement. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's it. I mean,
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening. Okay, Ellen Lorraine.
Ellen Lorraine McCabe, I'm the Assistant City Manager and Finance Officer for the city.
Okay, Sherry.
Hi, I'm Sherry Hostedler, Senior Designer with George Miles and Bureau.
Okay, and Janelle.
Hi, I'm Janelle Cornwell. I'm the city planner with the city.
All right. So the primary purpose of this evening's Q&A sessions is really to take questions from the public and to answer questions from the public. But there have been some questions that have come in during the day, and some are topics that we've had multiple inquiries. So I thought we would start with first an overview of our website and the virtual workshop format, and then answer some of the questions that I know we've already received. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I will walk you through. One, we've had some questions on how to get to the virtual workshop. When you come to the city's homepage, if you click on this graphic on the rotating graphics that says virtual beach parking workshop, it will take you there. You can also get to it if you go under the government tab over to the right-hand side under ordinances, amendments, and projects, and beach parking workshop is over there. We have on here some videos for you to watch. This one right here, presentation for January 18th, that will open a YouTube video that I'm not going to play. I just wanted to show you how we get to it. Unfortunately, the ads are just part of what YouTube does. So ultimately you can skip the ads. And then you get into interactive exercises. So for each section of exercises, there's a video overview. So here's the link to the video overview of the parking permit section. And then there are some questions, as zone parking or no zone parking. And again, that's all explained in the video. And if you see some of these, you can hover and you can see that it's a hyperlink. So for instance, parking permit types, you can see what we mean by hang tag and license plate number. You know, it would be license plate recognition. You know, again, when you get down into mailboxes, we've got a picture of cluster boxes, and then we've got existing standard mailboxes. As we get into parking identification and delineation, here we have links to maps, and the maps are put over top of high resolution photography that was obtained by flying a drone. And you can see that the red shows spaces where there would not need to be any encroachments removed, and the yellow, there might need to be some encroachments removed. And then finally, you get to how we would physically delineate, and you can see this flyover that shows you, and I'm just showing this as an example. You know, this is the one that shows using railroad ties. And again, those are all gone over in the video as well. And then you can submit your comments here. If there are specific comments that aren't related directly to the choices, you can submit them here. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I do want to address some of the questions that have come up. One question we received was, why was there nobody from Lewis Beach included on this parking committee? The city of Lewis had two beach parking committees. One ran in 2018, and the more recent one was 2020 and early 2021. Those committees did have representation of Lewis Beach property owners, and they made recommendations to mayor and city council, one of which was to develop a parking permit program. That was assigned to staff. So this is not a committee that is looking to, you know, provide advisory or or those types of comments, similar to what we would get from a citizen committee. This is really our team of professionals that work for and with the city, trying to take that recommendation and put some structure to it to bring back to mayor and council so that they can determine how to move forward and if to move forward with the parking permit program. One of the other questions that I received was, what if we don't want a parking permit program at all? You can certainly submit that in the comments, again, at the bottom of that web page, submit additional comments here. If you don't think that there should be a permit system, that is an absolutely valid comment. One of the questions that we've seen in a couple of different ways, but repeatedly, has to do with delineation. And you know, the question, if I'm gonna just kind of summarize it, is why is there a parking space in front of my house, but not a similar space in the house a block over that would be the same location as my house? I'm gonna ask Charlie to kind of address how that was done so that you all understand the methodology of doing that. You know, and then after that, I think that's the main questions that we've received before this evening's Q&A. So then we can start to go into questions. So Charlie, can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. We were tasked with coming up with a parking space delineation plan for the entire beach side. And it was a plan that was to show every potential parking space on the beach side for bringing some order to the parking on the beach side through the parking permit plan. When we did that, when we went through that exercise of creating the potential parking space plan, there were many existing conflicts that would not allow for parking spaces to be shown on our plan. So if you look at the very first plan, it's got it delineated in a note at the very top right-hand corner, but generally where there were existing mailboxes or light poles, utility poles, fire hydrants, existing trash enclosures, obviously driveways, and also no parking areas that are existing and delineated or designated by no parking signs. We did not show parking spaces in any of those areas with those sorts of conflicts. Just so you're clear, the red spaces are shown as potential spaces that don't have any additional conflicts. The yellow spaces that are shown have conflicts such as shrubbery, small trees, that sort of thing that could be removed if it's decided to go that way in the future after all this discussion. So that's the difference between the red and the yellow. Where there are no spaces shown, there was conflicts with mailboxes, poles, hydrants, trash enclosures, driveways, and no parking areas that are already designated.
So Charlie, we've got a question. What about gates, footpaths, natural driveways that have been in use for decades, and protection for natural habitats and mature trees that are homes to wildlife, offer shade, wind block, and natural beauty that enhances Lewis Beach?
I guess I would say that we tried to account for some of that, but I would also encourage people to put that into a comment so that we can look at it in more detail. I mean, that's the purpose of this meeting, is to gather that kind of feedback, but it needs to be fairly specific so that when we go back and look at the parking plan and someone's talking about a driveway that's been in use for a while, yeah, we've got to know where that is so that we can take a look at it and either remove or add spaces as necessary.
Okay, so we have received 3 questions in the Q&A box, so I'm going to go ahead and start answering these. William Wolf asked, will current property owners on Lewis Beach that have off-street parking be expected to use permits to use their driveway? The answer is no. The permits would be only for the on-street parking. One, J. Paul McNamara asks, do homeowners have to buy seasonal passes? What we are looking at this point is if we go to a permit system, that there would be a cost, and part of that is because there are costs to administering a program. So we want to make sure that we are able to cover the cost of the program. And then the other thing is that you know, the cost of it helps to manage it. If there's not a value to a permit, it's hard to determine. So it could be something, and one of the questions that we do ask is, should the permits be available only to Lewis residents, or should they be available to the general public? So we want your feedback on that. We have, let's see, Yvonne asks, how many spots will each resident be allocated since they are the homeowner? So at this point, we are not looking necessarily at allocating any spaces for individual homeowners. We have gotten some comments from homeowners whose homes have been there for many years and do not have off-street parking. And so there is some sense of, you know, a request, and I think a reasonable request, that for people who do not have off-street parking, that we make some accommodation to afford them, you know, permits, a designated spot, something, because again, they've been relying on the street parking for, you know, the entire time they've been there. But the code requires a minimum of 2 off-street parking for a residential use. So any newer homes are going to have, there are very few homes without the permit or without driveways. Let's see, I think it's that one. Melanie Mosier asked, what about the bike lane on Cedar? And I think that is definitely something that even under the current scenario, the bike lane on Cedar is not actually a designated bike lane. It's a shoulder, and it's actually more narrow than a regular shoulder, but it does get used by bicycles. I know at one point the Bike and Ped Advisory Committee had requested that the city look to add a bike path to Cedar. And I think the sense was that we wanted to see how we manage the parking before we would get to that. The other thing is that Bay Avenue several years ago was made a multimodal street, which means that it's one way for vehicles, but bicycles and bicyclists and pedestrians can go either way. So that's really the safer route for traveling in that area. Why are there no parking spaces on Bay Avenue, Dina Williamson? The reason is, frankly, there's just no space. We don't have the right of way to add parking. We have the right of way for the street, and that's what we have. With the other streets, we have a much wider right of way that allows for parking. Gail Marshall asked, how effective will all this work be if beach homeowners can erode the effort by creating a driveway that covers the entire street front, puts up a mailbox, etc.? Does Lewis have an ordinance that limits the width of a driveway? So the answer to that is yes, we do have an ordinance that limits the width of a driveway to 20 feet. And that is something that there's something in the zoning that relates to curb cuts. So it was questionable whether it applied here because there's no curbs. In 2018, Mayor and City Council amended the code to make it clear that any street access for a residential property could not exceed 20 feet. Rick Stover, Would the spots in the drone photos be the only places that would allow on-street parking? So if there is not a marked space, you cannot park there. And that, yes, that is the way, one of the ways that it was described during one of the beach parking committees was that the parking on Lewis Beach is like the wild, wild west. So part of this would bring order to where you can and can't park. So we would have delineated parking spaces, and if it's not a delineated parking space, it would not be open for parking. Don Thompson asks, it would be very helpful if someone would explain the intended goal of the proposed parking changes. Is it revenue production to enable better enforcement, increase the number of parking spaces, or control who parks where? Are we trying to ensure that homeowners will have adequate parking for family and guests by limiting access to homeowners only? It is very difficult to evaluate the proposed spaces without first knowing the goal. So really, the goal, as I understand it, it's not necessarily to bring more parking. It's not to limit parking to homeowners on Lewis Beach. It is really to bring order and predictability and manage the parking that is there. And right now, and one of the comments we got in from a Lewis Beach resident, and I think we've all observed this over the last 2 years, is that Lewis Beach was popular, but there were still some relatively quiet, less busy areas. Since the pandemic has hit, those who did not know Lewis Beach in terms of the residential streets and the beach, you know, in that area, a lot of people have discovered it. So we have seen much more of an increase in demand for parking. And frankly, in 2021, we did have enforcement. So people who parked in places that were not legal parking spaces did get tickets. But in 2020, we saw some pretty concerning things. And frankly, the streets at some point, sometimes people were parking so that emergency vehicles might not have been able to get through. So it really is about bringing order and managing the supply and of the spaces and how we allocate them. There's some thought, I'm not sure, you know, I think there are many factors that go into this, but one of the thoughts that was shared during one of the beach parking committees, and since we've had two, you know, it's hard to necessarily remember which comments were made at which ones, but you know, there's some sense that because we charge at Savannah Beach and Johnny Walker Beach, that people are parking on the streets to avoid having to pay. So again, a permit system helps to balance that out as well. So I think the goal is really to manage the parking in a way that's predictable and that is respectful to the fact that it is a residential neighborhood. So Michael Fasano said, is the objective to add as many spaces as possible. I'm concerned that with a significant beach erosion, we may be overloading beach capacity. And that is something that definitely was discussed during the parking committees. And we are definitely, there's no part of this process that is looking to jam in as many spaces as we can. And we certainly understand that that's a balancing act. At the same time, it is, you know, it is a public beach. You know, you're probably aware of the Warner grant, that this is an area that's set aside for the people of Lewis and Sussex County for their enjoyment. And in addition, you know, we rely on the Army Corps of Engineers and the state of Delaware for our beach replenishment. So again, we do have an obligation to make the beach available to people who may not live or own property there. J. Paul McNamara said, I would think that our taxes be sufficient to pay for homeowners rather than a seasonal costs that, I'm not reading anything that says anonymous. If you're asking a question or making a comment, we ask that you state your name, and that is consistent with the FOIA law for virtual meetings that speakers are supposed to identify themselves. Giselle Muller Parker asked, why not paint yellow no parking zones by the stop signs on all of the side streets as is currently done on Cedar so that neighbors can see, I'm sorry, my eye went away for a minute. So that neighbors can see cars speeding on Cedar when we need to turn on Cedar from our home street. That is certainly an option. And I think I expect that to come through. And that's certainly something that we could do and that we could present to council as an option. Don Long asked, will the proposed plan include at-grade bike lanes on Cedar Street? The answer at this point is no. There's been no direction for us to do this. There's a few anonymous and like I said, we will answer questions if you put your name by the question, but we are not answering questions that are marked anonymous attendee. Do you need a permit to park in your own driveway? I cannot see the designated map with designated spaces. Is there another way to view it? So they are links on the website. So you would have to go to that website. We can certainly have copies available for people to come look at City Hall. What we can get those printed and have them at the front desk so that if people do want to come in and look at them physically, if you're not able to see them on the computer, we can have that by midday tomorrow. Giselle Muller Parker, if we live on the beach and pay taxes, why would we need to pay for permits to park in front of our own homes? Again, this is a policy question. And I mean, there are fees for service, and then there are things that are paid for with the general taxes. And you know, again, if we do a permit system, then there is a cost to administering it. So mayor and council would need to figure out if that cost will be borne by the existing tax base or through fees. Francine Balenskis, why couldn't taxpayers receive no-cost permits to park on side streets off Cedar? Again, that's a policy decision that ultimately city council will need to make. From my perspective as the manager, if we're adding a permit system, we are adding a cost, and that cost needs to be paid for somewhere, whether it's through fees or whether it's through taxes. Again, we have from Caitlin Craven, why are there no parking spaces on Bay Avenue? And that is because there's not the right of way. Bobby Birch has asked, so you want people to give you opinions, but you are not allowing the option of homeowners being able to park in front of their house without paying to do so. You can certainly put that in the comments, and that will be shared with mayor and city council. And then even after we pay for a pass, how can we be assured that our families and friends can park in front of our home? Do you think it is fair to in essence create an additional tax for some homeowners on Lewis Beach? Again, most homes have off-street parking, and you know, I think these are all questions that are policy questions that ultimately mayor and city council will need to make the determination. Janie Warren and Bob Payne asked, how do other beach towns administer their permit system in the summer? There must be some good intelligence already in place that would help. The answer is we have looked at how other places administer. Some of them do well. So in some places, all on-street parking through the entire town is permit. And in those cases, they typically, I think Rehoboth does give, I think one free permit, it might be two, that to property owners. Other towns charge for all of them. So we have looked at that, and that has kind of informed, what we're bringing forward. Dennis Reardon asks, will a guest of a resident that parks on the resident's property be required to have a permit? Again, this is not related to parking on somebody's private property. This is only related to on-street parking. It occurs to me that I think I didn't answer part of one of Bobby Birch's questions, which was, how can you be assured that you're going to be able to park in front of your house? And the reality is, with on-street parking, you're never assured that you're going to be able to park in front of your house. So that is a reality of on-street parking. Bobby Balinskis says, then why are we enforcing this? And I'm not sure what that was to. Again, we keep getting things from an anonymous attendee, and we're not taking questions or comments if your name is not associated with it. Giselle Muller Parker asked, if our driveway is less than 20 feet, why do we have more parking spaces in front of our house? Why not factor in the 20-foot width? What about our front door access? Again, we can start to look at other places that we would not have parking in front of the reason for keeping those driveways out is because a car can't go around a car that's parked. You need that clear. People can walk around a car to get to a front door path. But again, these are all things that if you put in the comments, we're able to kind of go through and really see where the public opinion is. Let's see, Bonnie Osler. Do I have this right? Is the city considering limiting parking on all Lewis Beach to Lewis residents only? In other words, barring everyone who doesn't live in Lewis from public parking spaces in this beach area. We are getting feedback on that. It does not necessarily mean that will rise to the top, but again, we're trying to gauge where the public opinion and desires are. Tanya Flickinger asked, how do you plan to delineate parking spots given the lack of curbs and the fact that many spaces are in the grass rather than paved surfaces? So that is one of the areas that we're looking for your feedback on the website. We have a number of options. One, railroad ties, 2, parking bumpers, 3, just using signs, and the 4th was using flexible rubber bollards. So, and there are visuals of all of those on the website. So again, I encourage you to look at those and share with us what your thoughts are. Dennis Reardon asked, given the Warner grant, can you restrict access to only the residents of the city? At this point, we don't know. We haven't researched that. I do think it gets a little trickier because again, the Warner grants, it's for the enjoyment of the people of Lewis, of Sussex County, and of Delaware. Penny Gerlach, my house is on Bayview. We need to be able to park in front of our house. Currently, it's first come, first serve. What can be done to secure parking for us in front of our house? And again, at this point, there is no plan to designate any specific spots for individual properties. If it is a situation where there is no off-street parking, I think that's one of the things that we will need to look at because several people have asked similar questions. again, if you want to submit a question, please use your name. We have a number of questions in here from anonymous attendee, and we're not answering them. Tony and Maureen Mafudi, I hope I got that right. Why can't we expand the existing parking lots? So that was one of the things that was discussed in the 2018 Beach Parking Committee. And the decision at that point was not to expand the parking lots. To Don Thompson's question, he would add to Anne Marie's explanation that the safety of pedestrians, bicycles. So Khalil, did you want to expound on that? Do you want me to unmute you? How about, we'll come back to that because we have like another 50 questions in the Q&A. Given the number of parking spaces, will the city limit the number of daily parking permits? And the answer to that is yes. You know, we're going to have to determine based on the number of spaces how many permits we can issue. And you know, it could be the case that very few you know, daily permits, or maybe daily permits become not feasible because of the demand for seasonal. Did you have an answer to that one, Dennis? You just turned your camera on.
I don't fully understand what the question is, to tell you the truth.
Okay, so it's saying, given the number of parking spaces, would we limit the number of daily parking permits? So I think the answer is yes,
Yes,
you
we
have
would.
to limit the number of permits.
Yes, we would.
And I'm sure IPS has dealt with, you know, given a number of spaces, what percent oversell can you do without creating a problem? So that will be definitely part of the analysis.
Absolutely.
Lisa Williams, why is the proposal so inequitable about the parking spaces, about how the parking spaces are put? Some streets have none or few, and others have even 7 spaces. Why take people's lawn right up to their front step? And again, I think Charlie answered this earlier. It was really about putting spaces where there are not conflicts. So you have driveways, you have mailboxes. In some cases, you have mature vegetation. What am I missing, Charlie?
Fire hydrants, utility poles, trash enclosures, those sorts of things. And then she follows up with, I think, a question about why show parking spaces up to somebody's front step. So I would encourage her to comment on that and exactly where she sees that, so that we can take a good look at it.
Right. If you have comments regarding delineation in a specific area at a specific address, make sure you submit that address so that we can look at it again. Charlie and Sherry, and I think some of Sherry's colleagues, spent a good amount of time out in the field, you know, field truthing all of these. But again, it's impossible to, you know, make sure that we know, you know, looking at a large area, what your specific concern is. So if you have a concern that relates to in front of a specific address, please share that with us. Janet Shank, if you do offer parking to non-residents, why aren't you considering a tiered price system for residents versus non-residents? And I would expect that we would look at a tiered system. So I would not expect to charge the same for Lewis residents as we would charge to non-residents. Marianne Zwig asked, would this be a lottery? I don't expect it to be a lottery. I think what we would do is we would open it to Lewis residents, you know, assuming that it's open beyond Lewis residents in general, that we would open it up to Lewis residents first. And then, I mean, I think that there will be enough for the initial demand, but, you know, again, we'll have to manage that. Janie Warren and Bob Payne asked, why is the other side of Savannah Road toward the ferry not subject to the permit system? And again, the task that we were given when the beach parking committee finished its work and passed its recommendations to council was really to focus on this area. If you go down toward the ferry, you know, you've got Cape Henlopen Drive, and then you've got Pilot Point, which is all private. You've got Port Louis, which is all private, and you've got Cape Shores. So there's only a couple of streets back there, Tennessee Avenue, Texas Avenue. So there's really there, and those streets typically don't get a lot of parking. So this is really the area where the supply and demand issue has been greatest. DOCG 1969@gmail.com. If you could submit your comment again, but put your name to it, that would be helpful. Thank you. Bobby Birch says, I understand these decisions are being sought from those Lewis residents who do and do not live on the beach. This is understandable regarding parking. My question is, why do those outside of Lewis Beach weigh in on mailboxes? How will you know the source of those stating their opinions located on the beach? Okay, so with each of these questions, we ask also for each of those selections that you make, we ask that you say whether you're a Lewis Beach resident, property owner, or outside of Lewis. And that definitely as it relates to mailboxes, the Lewis Beach residents and property owners, obviously it's your mail. So that definitely, and several comments that we got indicated from people who don't live on Lewis Beach indicated that they weren't going to respond to that because it didn't directly affect them. Jennifer Demery, there were 4 options for parking delineation. Options 1 and 3 call out use of railroad ties and parking bumpers. Has there been investigation about both railroad ties and parking bumpers in relation to stormwater management and potential impact of forcing water back onto private property? Charlie, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, no, we haven't looked at that. It's a good question. I wouldn't expect that that would create a big stormwater management ponding problem. But it could definitely be something that we want to look at for particular sites, particular locations, depending on what the grading is at the property. And Anne-Marie, can I just add one other thing too? Just a lot of people are asking questions, but just to encourage people to go into the website and put their comments in there too.
Right.
Because it's all set up there, and that'll be, along with this question and answer, that'll be a great way for us to compile and look at the data.
Great, thank you. Ellen Percy Miller asks, with all of the increased usage of Lewis Beach, will you hire more lifeguards? That is a good question. We've had a couple of members of council have actually asked us to look at potentially having more guarded beach and figure out how we would manage that. We are, I think that is something that does require public discussion, because, you know, one of the things that some of the people on you know, who go to the beach at the beach streets, they don't want lifeguards. They kind of like it being an unguarded beach. So I think this is, I think it's something that we will definitely be looking at in the coming years. In particular, the Roosevelt Inlet area has gotten very popular, and that's the area that we were asked to look at. But certainly the issue of whether we need additional guarded beach is something we need to have a discussion about as a community. Robin Morantz Hennig. Will Lewistown residents be considered the same as Lewis Beach residents in allocating permits and deciding about the fees? And I would say yes, that any Lewis resident we would have to treat Lewis residents as a unit. Margaret Delp, thank you for your work on this issue. Question about the proposed parking space on Laurel Avenue where you have 10 head-in spaces next to one house. Did you consider access to the natural driveway next door and access to the back property? Would you consider fewer parallel spots instead? Do you consider disproportionate effect on one property owner to have 10 spaces alongside their house? Charlie, can you make a note? We need to look. We'll look at that. Thank you for bringing that to our
Yes,
attention.
good point. Thank you.
And again, I although Charlie's making a note, just make sure you submit that through the through the form as well. Larry Thornton asks, are cars allowed to park on grass on side streets and Cedar? And the answer to that is yes. June Rose Futcher asks, Lewis Beach Residential and Roosevelt Inlet is popular because it's free. I mentioned that earlier. Lewis Beach has been overwhelmed with massive numbers of vehicles and beachgoers long before the pandemic. Mrs. Futcher rang the bell more than 10 years ago, along with a few neighbors. So yes, Lewis Beach has definitely become increasingly popular, but it seems like even more so in the last 2 years. Marshall, isn't it the case that there is no other beach from Cape Henlopen to Assateague where you can park at the beach for free? I see people driving from a 200-mile radius to park at Lewis Beach because it's free. This makes no sense. Why not raise revenue like every other town does south of Cape Henlopen? Why not set aside a parking area in town and shuttle people to the town beach for a fee? That way folks can shop in the town before or after the beach and spend money on local businesses. We are in a separate project. We are looking at, we're actually in the process of developing a pilot shuttle system that we are hoping to launch this summer. So we are working on that as well. And again, hopefully that will help to release some of the pressure on parking. Mary Ann's Wig asked, would this be seasonal? The answer is yes. It would be during our normal parking season, May 1st through September 30th. Beth Jeline asked, do parking space identification maps indicate the only spots where cars will be allowed to park if this is adopted? And what I would say, yes, kind of. Once something is approved as this is the final delineation, that would be the on-street parking. Beyond that would not be permitted. Fran Valenskis, could there be loading zones in front of beach access areas where we can unload our family and beach equipment such as kayaks and boards? The challenge to that is that area is Bay Avenue, and there is not sufficient right of way to have area to do that. Now, many of the streets have street right of way that goes to the other side of Bay Avenue that could certainly be used for that loading and unloading. Keener, we're going to need your full name if we're going to answer the question. Penny Gerlach at 124 Bay Avenue, how can we secure parking in front of our house on Bayview? Currently, it's first come, first serve. So again, I think one of the things we need to look at is there off-street parking? If there's not off-street parking, I think we need to look at those specific locations to see what we can do. Cole Flickinger, 903 Cedar. There are 2 parking spaces shown in our front yard. Currently, we installed fertilized irrigate and maintain sod to the paved edge of Cedar. Will Lewis remove the sod and install hardscapes or asphalt paving? If not, when cars park on sod, it will die and there will be erosion and unimproved surface that will look unmaintained. I understand that our sod extends into the right of way, but currently the city does not maintain the unpaved right of way along our frontage. I saw a similar comment to that came in earlier, and I would say again, Cole, make sure that you put that in your comments. I think that again, you're not the first person to bring it up, and it is something we're going to have to look at. At this point, all of the delineated parking is shown off of the road. It might be the case that the parking spaces straddle the edge of the road, because again, that is something we've heard. Right now, I believe there's not enough on Cedar. There's not enough room on the pavement between that white line and where the lawns begin to park entirely in that paved area. So I expect that at this point, it's already happening that people are parking two wheels on that anyway. Wanda Berrigan, if parking spaces are well marked and parking laws are enforced, why the need for parking permits at all? Which is a very good question. And again, that ultimately becomes a decision of mayor and council. Right now, parking spaces on the streets on Lewis Beach are not clearly marked, and it is not an organized system for parking. So it's possible we could delineate parking and not have permits, but then you still have the issue of, people parking there maybe because it's free and they don't want to pay the meter fee. So, I mean, these are all kind of the balancing act that we're working on. Irma Kowski, how does the police department feel about a permitting system? Will they be responsible to police and ticket violators? I don't know, Lieutenant, do you want to address that, or do you want Dennis to address it?
Yeah, I think the parking enforcement for the city would handle the majority of that enforcement.
All right, so Dennis, I might need to bring you in to answer some of this. Mike Savage asks, what costs have you identified to administer the permit system, and what is the revenue you project from non-homeowner permits? We have not done revenue projections, that I can assure you. The cost of the program will differ based on how it's structured, but Dennis, I know you've looked into some costs specifically.
It's hard to say right now about, how much it's going to cost, because we need to get this information back on whether there'll be multi-zones, no zone, whether it will be hang tags or license plate, and how many different types of passes are we going to sell. So, but I'm very comfortable with the solution that will fit into our current enforcement package, will handle anything that we throw at it. I just don't know what the individual pass cost is going to be, permit cost.
Until we have a more structured scope.
We need to see a little bit more. I mean, it depends on a lot of things, like the city council and mayor will have to decide what kinds of information are we going to request from someone that wants a permit, so we can process to make sure that we're really selling a resident permit to a resident. So, there's rules that have to be set up, but I'm comfortable that we have a solution that will handle anything we can throw at it.
Okay, thank you. Keena Ross asks, with all of the currently identified designated parking spaces marked as available now in red, and then with those in the future yellow, what is the expected number of beachgoers in each case, and then what is the capacity of the beach? You know, the issue of beach capacity has come up. It actually came up quite a bit during the last beach parking committee. The challenge with capacity is, one, there's not a clear formula for determining capacity. So we did look some at it, but the other thing is, it's hard to manage beach capacity because we don't have attendance on the beach. Like if you go to New Jersey where they have a beach fee and you have to pay to go onto the beach, they have people, kind of gatekeeping. We don't have that, and I have never gotten the sense that there's any interest in doing that. So it's really hard to then manage to a capacity. Fred Beaufait said, what about our visitors? Our economy is based on visitor, and a permit system will only hassle visitors. Again, we do have 2 parking lots that are available. We also, again, it's possible that this permit system would be open to non-residents as well. That decision has not been determined yet. So I think that, and some of our visitors are people who rent houses for a week on Lewis Beach. So I don't think that any of this is driven by trying to hassle visitors, but rather to manage the limited inventory of parking that we have. Ellen Wilson said, I am curious about the reevaluation process of proposed spots. If there is community feedback, will that and the follow-up process be made public? The short answer to that is yes. We realize very much that this is a process that affects the public directly, and transparency is very important. So we will be following up with the public. Our plan at this point is to go to mayor and council with kind of a roll-up of where we are, and hopefully a recommendation going forward at their February meeting. It's possible that they may want to put that out for more public review once we've made changes based on these comments. So the public is definitely an important component to this whole process. That's why we're here now, before we've made any clear recommendations, and we will make sure that we continue to keep you in the process. Rob Wilson asks, how many Cedar Street homes have boats in yards that will be blocked ingress and egress by parking spots? Will there be any allowance for this and used by homeowners? I don't have an answer to that question. I haven't noticed a whole lot of boats in front yards, so I guess I had thought maybe that boats were taking access through the driveway, and then, if they're in the yard, being, moved from the driveway. But, again, the current system, people can park on Cedar, and that same issue can happen if there are boats that would be blocked under this. They could be blocked under the current configuration. Abby Woods asked, the beach is disappearing, especially the dunes, at least 10-foot loss. We are addressing this as they can park, but how much beach will be left? And that is a really good question, and I think that's a separate issue. And I know at the last mayor and council meeting, maybe it wasn't the last one, it was December mayor and council meeting, mayor and council agreed to a contract with Tony Pratt to help us to get better state and federal attention for beach replenishment. Currently, under the federal beach replenishment, they only replenish the area from Roosevelt Inlet to, I think they said, about Iowa Avenue. And that leaves a good portion of Lewis Beach, you know, eroding and not being managed. So council is working on that issue as well as the parking. They're just kind of on different tracks. Fred Buffet asked, what is the problem that a parking permit system is to solve? It is certainly not going to provide more spaces. Again, the issue is really bringing order and predictability to the system so people know where they can park, know where they can't park. It then also manages supply and demand. And to the degree that some of the parking that's happening on the streets is because people don't want to pay for the lots, it could move some of those visitors back to the paid lots. Andrew Reed asked, why were all side streets on the canal side of Cedar included in this parking review until Massachusetts Avenue? Massachusetts, Midland, and Market on the canal side of Cedar often see folks parking for the beach, but will have no designated parking under this current project, correct? I'm going to ask Charlie or Sherry to, I mean, Sherry, you did you led the delineation, so I don't know if you're able to answer that. And that might be something that if we don't have an answer now, we might be able to get back to you.
Yeah, so I see where you're talking about. There's Massachusetts Market and Midland on the canal side, and we did not show any parking on that side. That's definitely something that we can handle with a comment and look into that as well.
Okay, thank you. Marshall says, isn't it the case that there is no other beach? Oh, hold on. We already answered that. Okay, sorry. Fred Buffet says, as I listen to the presentation, I fear the city is opening a huge can of worms. I think that the can of worms has been opened. So I think we're trying to manage that, but I certainly understand that comment. Peggy Nolly, will the city maintain these areas? The city will continue to maintain the streets. At this point, we do not have plans to do any additional maintenance in the grass areas. The Dewey Beach has a similar system where their street parking is, you have to be on the grass. And I haven't seen major issues there. I can certainly check with their manager to see if there have been problems. Cole Flickinger says, as an owner in South Rehoboth, this is our understanding and experience for homeowners. Rehoboth issues non-transferable window stickers to all property owners for all vehicles registered in the owner's name and can provide the city with DMV registration that's current. In addition, they issue 2 transferable seasonal permits. They do not charge for these. So I think they also have quite a few more homes that do not have off-street parking. Dina Williamson, so the plan imposes parking spots and costs on some homeowners, but not others in a random manner and feels very discriminatory. How does the city plan to deal with potential lawsuits? And you know, again, I don't think that's necessarily really a question. Is there a ratio of parking spaces to bathroom access? The answer is no. I mean, again, we're not looking to add parking to the existing streets. We're looking to add order to parking that's already there. So hopefully by adding order and people not parking anywhere they can seem to fit a car, hopefully we won't have quite as many vehicles. And by having a permit system where you actually have to pay and you have a financial stake in it, hopefully some of those behaviors will improve as well. Larry Thornton, is there a public safety issues with cars parking on Cedar Street in the shoulder up to the yellow line? What are walkers, joggers, bicycles, strollers supposed to do? Now we have to go into the street. So that's an issue whether we do or do not have a parking permit program. I mean, one option, and I'll go to Charlie in a minute. One option would be to not have any parking on Cedar, but that's not the scenario we have now. Right now, that parking is allowed on Cedar, so those issues, you know, we're dealing with now. Charlie, what?
I was just gonna say, the way the delineation plan is shown right now, the parking spaces are generally, not every single one, but generally in the grass area off the shoulder, well off the white side lane line of the two-way traffic on Cedar Avenue. So the shoulder area in most places would still be available to, you know, the walkers and pedestrians and bicyclists.
Okay, thank you. As Dennis Reardon asks, as to the mailboxes, can anyone vote on this, or is it limited to affected property owners? Again, everything's set up that anybody can submit a response, but we're also asking for whether you're a Lewis Beach property owner / resident, Lewis property owner / resident, not Lewis Beach, or if you're from outside of the city. So as it relates to mailboxes, certainly the feedback from the people who live on and own property on Lewis Beach will weigh more heavily. Tanya Flickinger asks, will there be a limit set on the number of passes sold? Has the city determined the number of spots available? So yes, I mean, so we've determined the number of spots available based on the delineation plan that's put out there. But we also recognize that there will be changes to that. And yes, there will be a limit on the number of permits sold, and that will, again, we will draw from our experienced partners at IPS to help us to develop that part. Sherry, do you want to address how many spaces? I don't have it right in front of me.
Sure. So there's 310 spaces along Cedar Avenue, and then the other side streets have 263. So right now, currently, with the red spaces and the yellow spaces, we're showing 573.
Thank you.
And can I add to that? Because I think I saw in one of the other questions that someone misunderstood the yellow spaces as future spaces, but they're actually spaces that have current potential conflicts, not hydrants, utility poles, existing mailboxes, et cetera, but you know, shrubbery, low-lying vegetation, that sort of thing, that may or may not be able to be removed without a whole lot of difficulty to create a parking space. So they're not future spaces, they're just spaces that are more in question than the red spaces, which are, you know, still a question in terms of will they end up on the final designation or parking designation plan, but there's no conflicts on those red ones as there are in the yellow ones.
All right, so I've just been asked, can when you're submitting general comments through the website, can you please make sure that you put your name and address, and preferably your email address as well. In some cases, we may want to follow up with you. So, you know, especially if you have something that's very location driven. Rosalba Bellin, if a resident is in a wheelchair, is it possible to have a designated spot in front of the house? That actually, and if you, households that have a need for a handicap space can make that request to mayor and council independent of this process. Does the Janie Warren and Bob Payne ask, does the Warner grant apply to the balance of the beach toward the ferry and Cape Henlopen? And yes, the entirety of the beach is open to the public. Marshall asked, isn't, okay, so I thought I answered this, but I'll say, isn't it the case that no other beach from Cape Henlopen to Assateague where you can park at the beach for free? I see people driving 200-mile radius to park at Lewis Beach because it's free. This makes no sense. Why not raise revenue like every other town does south of Cape Henlopen? So, okay. Robin Lester asked, why was the decision made not to expand the current parking areas between Beach 1 and Beach 2? What drove that decision? That was, I think that was in the 2018 Beach Parking Committee. I can't remember all the details. One, it was, I think, going to be difficult with Denrec because of the location as it relates to the Dune line. Additionally, adding more impervious cover would mean that we'd need to add stormwater management. There may have been other reasons. We can certainly look at that, but that was the decision made at that point in time. Linda Williams, the decision not to expand parking lots already at the beach was 3 years ago. Why is it not being revisited? It certainly can be revisited, and I don't think that there, you know, if mayor and council wants to revisit it, we certainly can. I think regardless of what we do in that area, there's still a lack of order as it relates to parking on the streets in Lewis Beach. And as more and more people come to Lewis, we're going to continue to find, you know, conflicts in that. Francine Balenskis says, it is fine to limit the number of parking permits, but taxpayers should have first access. And again, if you're making a comment, I would ask that you submit that in the comments, because I'm not sure that the Q&A may be saved in the Zoom file, but we're trying to keep all of the comments through that portal. Catherine Harris, my home was built on Lewis Beach before the driveway requirement, and therefore we need to park our cars on the street. Will we then be able to purchase 2 permits? I do think we're going to have to come up with some sort of an accommodation for the residents who do not have off-street parking, because again, this is a legacy situation from, you know, these houses were built many, many years ago. And I talked to one property owner today who told me that he was asked by the city manager at the time, 40 years ago, not to put in a driveway. So, you know, I think we do need to make sure that we address the legacy issue of homes that do not have off-street parking. Is there a plan for the parking area at Roosevelt Inlet? Will that be permit also? That will need to be decided as part of this. You know, part of the problem is if that is the only place where parking is free, it's going to be a mess up there. So I think that is going to have to be part of the consideration of this whole package. Lisa Stein Patterson, are residents required to buy a parking permit for their own driveway or their own lot? You are not required to have a permit for your off-street parking. It's only for on-street parking. Linda Williams, there are spaces at the end of our driveways as well as where the mailbox is. So what I would say is put that, please submit a comment, include your address so that we can look more closely at that area. Robin Herantz Hennig, aren't there a lot of houses, especially new ones, with driveways that go beyond the 20-foot wide code? If so, are there any plans to rectify that? Any existing driveway that has been accepted is not being required to be modified. In the cases where we have had a number of cases where plans have come in showing a 20-foot driveway, and when our inspectors have gone out to do their inspections, it's wider. In those cases, they are being, the contractor or property owner is being told that they need to reduce the width. There were some that snuck through a while back, but at this point, we are very, very conscious about, our inspectors are very aware of the driveway width. Joseph Yatsko, we have witnessed violators receive their tickets in 2021. They, for the most part, have been excited to find the penalty to be nominal in their opinion. As a result, we see the same vehicles park in violation in the very next day. It appears visitors from major cities with more severe penalties are parking in violation at our neighbor's expense with no regard for residential needs. Could there be a towing requirement for frequent offenders? We could certainly put that in our code. The other thing, we could increase the fines. We increased them a few years ago, but that was really, again, I agree compared to some, our fines are comparable to what you would pay to park for a day in some locations. So again, Mr. Yatsko, I would encourage you to submit that in the comments. J.R. Futcher says, would you like residents to meet and show the access places and explain our functions and needs perhaps? What I would say is if you, in the comments, give us your address and contact information, we will follow up if we need to. It might be that we're able to figure it out very quickly. Bonnie Osler said, since the limits on parking the city is discussing obviously will increase demand at Cape Henlopen State Park, what is Cape Henlopen State Park's position? They have not provided us any comments. Linda Stein Patterson, I see at least one spot delineated in front of our property at 1901 Cedar Street. The picture is too small and blurry to see if there are two spots delineated. Are we required to buy permits for those spots? If you are looking to do on-street parking, yes, you would need permits.
Hey, Marie.
Yes.
Hey, Marie. This is Charles. I want to remind everyone that you can zoom in on those plans to get a real close up, clear look at what's in front of your property.
Okay. All right. I am going to do two more questions, and then we are going to take a short break for 5 minutes, and then we'll resume, but I'll do three more questions. So thank you, Anthony Graciano at 310 Midland, for providing me your name so I can associate it with your question. When was the last time the Corps of Engineers added any sand to Lewis Beach? Are they scheduled for a replenishment project? They replenished, I think it was 2019. It's either 2019 or 2020. So we're about, I think we're 3 years out from a replenishment project. But again, the only place that they replenish is the area near the inlet, like between the inlet and Iowa Avenue. So we are looking to make sure that that happens, and we're trying to get that area expanded. Mike Savage asks, can you clarify again what the parking areas on the maps marked with black lines means? The black lines are the
Right-of-way lines. Generally, the right-of-way lines and other like driveways and things of that nature. Sherry can comment, but I don't think there's any parking spaces delineated by black lines.
That's correct. There's no parking that's delineated with black lines. That would only be the right-of-way lines.
Right. Okay, that's what I thought. Robin Lester wanted to know if it's possible to know how many people are on the Zoom. At this point, there are 99 attendees. At the most, there was 115. And then I'll do one more. Would owners of rental properties that can accommodate large numbers of renters be able to buy multiple permits? And I think, again, we need to determine that. I think we need to determine, again, because you don't want to sell out the permits immediately. So it might be that you have to, maybe you could buy two, and after such and such a date, if there are still permits available, that you could buy additional. Those are details that would need to be worked out. But again, if that's something where you have concerns or questions or ideas on what you think it should be, we would want those comments. Okay, so we are going to do a 5-minute break. It is 6:32. We will be back at 6:37. And if you recall, we have a 7 o'clock Q&A, which this clearly will go right into. So at 7 o'clock, I'll kind of give that overview again in case we're getting new people on. So hopefully that won't bore you too much. So we will see you in 5. All right. I told you we'd be back at 6:37 at 6:37. So I do want to say there's a ton of questions in here, but these are really good, thoughtful questions. And I think our team is very appreciative because I think this will really help us as we go the next steps. So Peggy Nolly, has it been considered to use the areas for beach access to be cleared for parking? Some are clear and some are not. We can certainly look at that. Hold on. I need to close my door. Give me a second. I'm sorry, I could hear my voice echoing from the office next door. So that is something that, again, if you make sure you put it in the comments, I'm going to ask our team here to make note of it because that is certainly something we can look at. Peggy Nolly also asked, with the influx of people who do not own or rent property on the beach, has the concern for bathrooms been discussed? And the answer to that is yes. And the big question is, if we were to do something, where would restrooms go? There are some places that have porta potties that are in enclosures to make them more attractive. We do have porta potties at Roosevelt Inlet. You know, I think, again, independent of whether we do a permit system, this is an issue that comes up repeatedly that we're going to have to address. Mary Jean Gilligan, how can the homeowner cut the grass with railroad ties? How safe are they for people walking and riding bikes? So I think,
Anne Marie?
okay, Charlie, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it would be something else that you need to use your trimmer around, I think, when you're cutting the grass. And in terms of pedestrian and bicyclist safety, they're set off the road quite a bit. So I don't think it would get in the way of any bicyclists. The pedestrians would just obviously have to be careful when they're walking along that stretch.
Thank you. J.R. Futcher says, can we use money to finance lifeguards? Quest Kayak is claiming certain lifeguard and first aid practice at Roosevelt Inlet and making that known. Does that indicate a safety risk for municipal and state beach? I mean, it's well known that those are unguarded beaches. I think it is something that we need to have the discussion of, again, with the community about whether there's an interest in expanding the guarded beach area. Jennifer Demery said, will the Roosevelt Inlet parking lot be part of the parking permit delineation under this effort? I think we would have to figure something. I think it would probably have to be either permit or paid somehow, because if everything else is paid, it would make Roosevelt Inlet a kind of a madhouse. Penny Gerlach said, what was the conclusion of the survey looking for encroachment on city property? I mean, so the survey that we did was really to determine the right of way so that we know definitively where the right of way is. So the conclusion is yes, there are encroachments. There's that we know. I don't think there's any intention that I'm aware of to remove encroachments at this point, but we are working to be more cognizant and to prevent them in the future.
Emery?
Oh, yes.
Hey, this is Charlie. With regard to that, I would say that the yellow spaces are indicative of areas where there are encroachments that could be considered for removal. It just depends on how this all plays out.
All right, thank you. So Francine Balinska says shuttling people is a great idea and save the parking for the taxpayers. Bobby Birch says Having followed Lewis Beach Parking Committee meetings, it was my impression that the mailbox clustering was to create more parking spaces. There are streets where this will not create any additional parking spaces. Will that be considered? It was my impression this meant lining up mailboxes together, but now with the box concept on the beach, have you considered that this will create a problem because of corrosion on the beach and the use of keys? So what we learned from the United States Postal Service is that they will not allow us to just simply move mailboxes together like we did on Bay Avenue. So if we are going to cluster boxes, it has to be the box. So I do think that they tend to be weather resistant. They're used all throughout the area. But again, I think really for the people who would be most directly affected, is that okay? Is it preferable to you? And I think that is something we're going, it would be a big change. And I personally would be surprised if that's something that people want. But again, we want your input. I could be surprised. Linda Blumner asked, what happens when an oversized truck parks and overlaps non-parking areas, as in a driveway and a fire hydrant? The answer is anything that is outside of its designated parking area could get ticketed. J. Paul McNamara, what was the big lot built on Route 1 called the Transit Center? I thought it as a parking and shuttle bus to take the folks to the beach. And certainly it is, but again, people are still driving into town. William Wolf, what provisions would be available for contractors, builders, etc.? I think that's something we would have to figure out. Would they get a temporary permit? Again, I don't think that it's fair to make a contractor pay for a permit when they're building a house. Often they're not parked on the street anyway, they're parked on the lot, but that is something we would need to deal with. Kina Ross, with all of the currently identified, I think I answered this, but what is the capacity of the beach? And again, I don't think we don't have a definitive number on the capacity, but we also don't have a mechanism to manage. We don't have beach fees like they do in New Jersey, where we're allowing people on and off the beach. So we don't have a beach capacity, but even if we did know what the capacity was, we wouldn't have a way to manage it. Greta Pennock says, so I have 8 head-in spaces in front of my home at 812 Bay. In the summer, my family takes up all the spaces. We have concrete blocks in each space. Our home is owned by a number of my out-of-town families, so I hope no one is going to have to buy and pay for permits. If those head-in spaces are on your property, then they would not. If it's within a city right-of-way, then that would be part of the public parking. J.R. Futcher, loading zones at the expense of natural habitats for convenience. So I think that's in reference to clearing the areas near the beach crossings. Rosalba, handicap parking. If a resident is in a wheelchair, is it possible? And the answer to that is yes. You would need to make a written request that we would take to mayor and city council. Claire Coggins, so I could potentially have 4 railroad ties in the middle of my front yard. Anything other than signs would be incredibly invasive. So that, again, just make sure you submit your feedback. Don Long says, the Lewis Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee identified several locations for bike racks between Savannah Road and Roosevelt Inlet. Are additional bike racks included in the proposed plan? The answer is no, they're not included in the proposed plan, but we are looking at that separately as well, and where we can add bike racks. And I've had some conversations with Janet. I know Matt Carter from Quest mentioned that we need more at Roosevelt Inlet as well. So that is something we're looking at. Gail Marshall, this may be a baseline question. How are you defining Lewis Beach resident versus Lewis City resident? So typically, I mean, Lewis Beach would be anything over on the bay side of the canal. But I mean, I think often people consider Lewis Beach to be really those streets off of Cedar. So if you live in Cape Shores and you put that you're a Lewis Beach resident, I think that's acceptable, but it definitely the people who are being most affected are the people we want to make sure that we have determined that they're Lewis Beach residents. Kathy McGinnis, when you refer to Lewis residents, are you referring to all property owners? So I would say property owners and residents. So that would capture people who are also, you know, full-time residents who might rent their home. Bobby Birch, will those of us with only one driveway be permitted to widen the driveway such as those already exist and thus parking permits are not needed? Again, inequity among homeowners on Lewis Beach. If you have a driveway and you can, you know, within if you stay within your lot coverage, if your access point at the right of way is less than 20 feet, you would be able to widen it. If you're interested in widening it, I would say contact our building official's office. Richard Glazer, what is the solution for the current situation where during peak season, people use the dunes for relief and change and dispose of soiled diapers in the brush on the side of the road due to lack of porta potties and trash receptacles? Where will these be located if this is a necessary consideration? Again, unfortunately, those are behaviors that are happening now. Hopefully with managing the parking, we might see some reduction in that. We do have trash receptacles at all of the beach crossovers. We could add them at other locations. The sense that I've gotten is that people don't necessarily want them beyond the beach crossovers because, you know, sometimes trash cans stink. And, you know, people may not want them near their homes. But I think we're definitely open to, if we need to install more trash receptacles, we can do that. Restrooms, again, we can look at porta potties, but again, I've heard two sides on that as well. A lot of people don't want to look at a porta potty near their house or smell one. Suzanne Duclos, some Lewis Beach properties have cottages as well as a main residence. What consideration is given to a multi-residence property? I mean, again, I think if we have a permit program and there's a, you know, people will be able to buy the permits. I don't know that there's any special consideration for houses with a guest cottage. Debbie Mellor asks, can you please explain zone or no zone? With zone, would your permit be assigned a specific zone? So yes, it would. So the idea of a zone is you could cluster some streets. So say you have Kentucky, Oregon, New Jersey is a zone. I'm just grabbing through streets. If that's a zone, then your permit would only be good for those 3 streets. So that means that, you know, if you live there and want to go and visit a friend and park up on Main, you can't because it's out of your zone. If it's not a zone, it's you have a permit, you can park anywhere on those streets. Penny Gerlach, I want to park in front of my house. How can you make that happen without cost to me? At this point, there's no discussion of any type of reserving specific spots in front of people's houses. Again, we will, if there's a valid handicap permit, we could sign spaces for to be handicap spots. We are going to be looking at what considerations we make for properties that do not have any off-street parking. But if you have off-street parking, I think you can't, I mean, I don't know that there's any scenario where you can expect to have a reserved spot in front of your house. But again, that's that's how it exists now. Anthony Graciano, will there be a fixed number of permits issued? How will you prevent too many being sold? Again, yes, there would be a fixed number, and I expect we're going to rely on IPS, who manages parking permit systems, to figure out, based on inventory, how many permits we could sell. Francine Valenskis, what about the trolley that picks up people in each community? Wouldn't that ease the parking issue? We are in the process of looking at a shuttle service. We are not looking at going to all city neighborhoods, but we are looking at going to a number of key locations. And absolutely, I think a shuttle service would reduce some of the parking demand. Mary Jean Gilligan, how will our children and grandchildren visit us if we don't have off-street parking? You know, just like now, I mean, if your children and grandchildren come to visit, the parking in front of your house may be taken. They might have to park a block away. I would expect that under a permit system, that would still be the case, but you would have fewer people coming in that area to park because you could only park with a permit. J.R. Futcher, will you talk with Cape Shores about their system to control public access and parking? Do folks really think we are barring the public? Is Cape Shores a Lewis community with police and emergency services? So I think that's separate from this. And Cape Shores, they do have, you can get a permit from them. They're private streets, but they do allow parking on their streets for use of the beach. Tanya Flickinger, during the last parking committee, it was determined that additional parking could not be added at lots 1 and 2 because those beaches have reached capacity. Also, Cape Henlope and caps visitors based on capacity limits. How does this square with the answer that there is no way to measure beach capacity? What I said is we don't have a formula for measuring beach capacity, but we also don't have a way to not allow people on the beach when it is at whatever that capacity is. Giselle Muller Parker says, all of the private communities like Pilot Point and Cape Shores are still part of the Warner grant. Public or private, they should all be held to the same standard as Lewis Beach for parking privileges. Pilot Point and Port Louis, their beach, well, and Port Louis doesn't really have beach in front of it. Pilot Point's beach is open, but it's condominiums, so you don't have parking like you do on the street. In Cape Shores, on-street parking is allowed for use of the beach. And between Cedar, or between Savannah and Roosevelt Inlet, I mean, those are public streets. They're publicly maintained. They're not owned and maintained by a homeowners association or individuals. They are city-owned streets. Abbey Woods. I may have missed this, but how about Roosevelt Inlet parking lot? We would have to come up with something, either having some sort of a pay system or having that under permits if we were to implement permits. Is there a plan for restrooms in this proposal? Nancy West, the answer is not in this proposal, but I mean, certainly it's clear that we need to figure out. I don't anticipate building another bathhouse. There's no place to put it. But really, at this point, the only things we would be able to do are porta potties. And again, we've gotten really mixed feedback on whether people want to do that. So I do think it's something we're going to need to really have a community conversation about. Rick Quill, for the very last time, and may I add a long shot, everyone who has a vested interest in beach parking, I have offered the city on numerous occasions to engage with the owners at the corner of East Savannah Road and Cape Henlopen Drive the vacant corner lot, a possible sale to the city before this property is developed. As Fred indicated, the issue is a Pandora's box waiting to be unleashed. And we understand that. Again, I think as long as there is free parking on the side streets, you're going to have a number of people who are going to go to those areas instead of parking lots, even if we were to improve that property for parking. Mina and Greg Clark, our house on Cedar Street has a very narrow driveway. We rely on parking in front of our house to park at the house. Has the parking committee considered unintended consequences of part of the plan? The plan we reviewed a few weeks ago showed trees on our property are in the way. For us to comply, an unintended consequence is removal of trees to make way for more parking, which is not in alignment with good stormwater practices. So again, if you can put that specific address in the comments, and Charlie, if you want to make note, it's 1603 Cedar, but if you can put it in the comments, we can make sure we get that. And any address that's called out, we're going to look more closely at whether that, whether it could accommodate the parking.
Amory, this is Charlie. I did note that address, and that's really the exact kind of input we want so that we can take a closer look at, so we don't create any kind of unintended consequences like that. So I
Right.
appreciate that comment.
Thank you. Francine Belinskis, due to the influx of new homeowners that are coming here from surrounding states, this is not going to get any easier. Something has to be done to control this issue now. In-town taxpayers should have the right of first access to the beaches. I know you're not going to read this, but it is an issue that should be thought about now, not later. It's only going to get worse. Linda Blumner, as a biker, I frequently find cars parked on the beach side, including in the area in front of Children's Beach House, where vehicles simply don't pull far enough into the space and force bikers and walkers into the road. So again, I think part of this is with delineated spaces, Dennis and his team will be able to enforce those issues as well.
And
JR,
just to add to
oh, go ahead.
to add to that, along the Children's Beach House, we now show them as parallel spaces, a good distance off the edge of the road, so and off the shoulder too, so that there wouldn't be that conflict with bikers.
Right. So I know that there has been, in the past, the idea of the pull-off parking by the Children's Beach House, the head-in, has really, people like that because it accommodates more vehicles. But we looked at that and really have safety concerns about that, especially with, again, you've got walkers, bikers, runners, and people unloading their car, having a kid standing next to them when you've got, traffic that should be going 25 and isn't always going 25. So that was really a safety issue. JR Fletcher says, does Warner Grant apply to Cape Shores? The answer is yes. JR Fletcher also asks, and a large and healthy habitat of beauty and home to many wildlife. So I think that's the trees. Marshall, why not charge cars not owned by Lewis Beach and town homeowners a daily fee of $10 a day? Why not charge Delaware residents, non-Delaware residents, a higher fee like the state park does? Again, there could be differentials, and that's all part of what we're looking at. J. Paul McNamara, what was, the transit center, right? That one popped up again, okay. Beth Galeen, I'm wondering if the existing patterns were observed during peak times. The spot identification map makes significant changes to what is allowed in my neighborhood. So, okay. I'm gonna do 3 more questions, and then we're gonna, because it's just after 7, we'll kind of go through the opening spiel again. Of course,
Anne Marie,
yes.
and just to further answer that last question, we did observe parking all last summer and the summer before that as part of several other committees, and just going, just doing this work over the last few years. So we do have a really good idea of what the peak parking looks like. People, like you said, parking head in at the Children's Beach House, parking along the side streets connecting Bay Avenue and Cedar Avenue, have a really good sense of that. I'm not exactly sure where her neighborhood was, where the parking arrangement would be significantly different, but we can find that out.
Okay, thank you. Sherry, Mike Savage asked, are the yellow spaces included in the numbers that you shared before?
So I can go over those numbers again. The total number of spaces, which would be red and yellow, is 573. So there are 310 that are on Cedar Avenue and 263 that are on the other side streets. So all of those total to be the 573. That's red and yellow. Now, if we want to break it out with just the yellow, there are 78 that are on Cedar Avenue, and there are 98 that are on the other side streets. So that would be the yellow spaces that have conflicts such as a tree or landscaping within the right of way, and there are 176 of those total.
Okay. All right. So with that, I'm looking and so Janelle and Ellen Lorraine, I know you've been watching. Have you seen more people come on in the past few minutes? Okay. So I'm going to once again kind of go through kind of the overview of where we are. We have been going since the 5:15 Q&A. So what we're doing now is we're taking a short break from the questions to kind of bring any newcomers up to speed on where we are. I also am continuing to see, my email keeps dinging because the comments continue to come in. So I do want to thank you for that. I'm going to take a minute to share my screen. And for those of you who have not been on the website and have not yet done the activities, I want to show you first, when you go onto the city website, if you click on that flyer that's up there that says virtual beach parking workshop, it'll take you right to the page. Also, if you hover over the government tab, over on the right-hand side, under ordinances, amendments, and projects, beach parking workshop, that will also take you there. We have a series of videos. So the first video is it says presentation for January 18th, 2022. And that's a video that's an overall overview. And then we get into the interactive exercises. So there are 3 areas of interactive exercises: permits, mailboxes, and identification and delineation. Each has a video overview. And for many of them, where there's a question or a choice selection that's not entirely straightforward, you are able to hover over it, see that it's a hyperlink, and that hyperlink will open up so you can see what a cluster mailbox would be or what a conventional mailbox would be. So as you go through, just look for that as well. Under parking space identification, we have a series of maps, and these are put on high resolution drone footage that was flown just the past few months. So you see the red spaces are spaces that would be able to be accommodated without removing any encroachments, and the yellow spaces might require removal of some encroachments. We have had a number of questions about delineation. So if you do have questions, and in particular, if there is an address that you have a particular concern about how delineation is shown on the map, submit that under your submit additional comments here. So this is where you can, everything else is kind of a, do you prefer this or do you prefer that? This you can kind of give us your overview of comments. So again, the purpose here is that we really do want to hear from you. This is not a fully baked cake. This is, you know, we've got ingredients and we're still trying to figure out which ingredients we're going to use, and all of that is going to be based on your input. So I will also once again introduce our team and clarify one of the questions that we got earlier today is why weren't there any Lewis Beach residents represented on our team? And our team is made up of staff and GMB, which is the city's engineering firm that we contract with. And there have been 2 beach parking committees, one in 2018, one in 2020 and early 21. And it was the recommendation of the beach parking committee that met in 20 and early 21 to develop a permit system. So that was taken by mayor and council, assigned to staff to kind of come up with the framework for how such a system would work. So we've been, you know, doing our research and trying to put some ideas together. And that's what we are presenting to you with this workshop, which we had initially intended to have in person, and given the COVID situation, decided we did not want people to be in a position where they felt they were going to miss out if they stayed home, to make sure that they limited exposure. So with that, I will go back to, oh, I didn't introduce our team, sorry. Our team, and again, I'm going in order that they're on my screen. Sherry, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sherry Hostedler. I'm the senior designer at George Miles and Buer.
Okay, Charlie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charlie O'Donnell. I'm the city's engineer working with George Miles and Buer.
Okay, Ellen Lorraine.
I am Ellen Lorraine McCabe. I'm the Assistant City Manager and Finance Officer for Lowell.
Okay. Lieutenant Azzato.
I'm Jim Azzato, and I'm a lieutenant with the police department.
Dennis.
I'm Dennis Crawford. I'm responsible for the parking enforcement and will be responsible for the integration and implementation of a permit system as defined.
Okay, Rick.
Rick Melendez, Department Manager, Maintenance.
All right, and Janelle. Oh, we can't hear you. I'll introduce Janelle. She's Janelle Cornwell. She is the Planning and Development Officer for the city, and she has really kind of driven the development of the website and spearheaded the public engagement part of this. So thank you to our team. I was asked to let you know how many people we have on the Zoom. We currently have 88 attendees. Earlier in the evening, we had at our all-time high, we had 115. So we are monitoring that. So from Giselle Muller-Parker, I hope you will take our comments seriously, as there has been a huge change. Yes, and I appreciate that there's a lot going on the beach, and that there's you know, a lot of sensitivity to how we deal with these issues, and we are committed to taking your comments and working with the community to make this go forward, or however it goes forward. Penny Gerlach, I support legacy parking. How do I sign up? Again, what I'll say again, and you'll hear me say it time and time again, just make sure you have your comments in the chat so we can make sure, or in the comment section, so we can address this. Freda Penna, your question from 602 has not been answered. I thought I answered that one. Can you put it in again? I was pretty sure I answered that, but I don't know what it is.
Emery, I think you did just probably 5 to 10 minutes ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
but if you can put it in again, I will. Or I don't, if somebody wants to pull that out from the answered questions while I do some others. Keena Ross said, speaking of Cape Henlopen State Park, when their parking areas are full, they close access and post signage, I think. Are there plans to monitor the parking for Lewis Beach and post signage? If this does occur, what are residents without driveways going to do? I mean, this is different because it's a system of neighborhood streets. I mean, I don't think we can't close the Lewis Beach. When our parking lot's full, we do put signs up that the lots are full, but I don't think we're in a position to close Lewis Beach. So hold on, Janelle found the question, and you have 8, so from, let me see. So Freda Penna, you have 8 head-in spaces in front of your home. In the summer, your family takes up all the spaces. You have concrete blocks in each space. Our home is owned by a number of my out-of-town families, so I hope no one is going to have to buy and pay for permits. So what I don't know, and we can certainly look at it more closely, is whether your property at 812 Bay Avenue, whether that parking is on your property or whether it's in the right of way. If it's in the right of way, it'd be subject to permits. If it's on your property, no permits would apply. Linda Blumner says, many vehicles are oversized for a standard space. Large vans and trucks with 3 carriers attached to back bumpers to carry their necessities. How does the homeowner deal with these issues? Again, if they're not parked legally, then we can ticket them. But you know, if they're in a legal spot, that would be allowed. Ellen Wilson, okay, thank you. I'm glad you appreciate the meeting, thanks. Mina and Greg Clark, how is the parking permit plan lined up to the master plan for the community and the capacity of the beach? To my knowledge, there's not a master plan for the community. And again, I've mentioned that we do not have a formula for beach capacity, nor do we have a method to control how many people go on the beach. We're trying to bring order to what is there now. So right now, people come and they park. In some cases, it's questionable whether it's a parking space. You know, if it's not clearly signed no parking, we're not able to enforce anything. This brings order to what's happening now. Linda Stein Patterson, 1901 Cedar Street. On the question of bathrooms, it would seem like a necessary plan for this, along with the permitted parking, given the number of spaces you would be opening up. Might consideration be given to building pay-per-use bathhouses on 1 or 2 of the paper streets, using the income to pay for staff to maintain and clean them? Or if porta potties are going to be used, they must be cleaned, maintained daily in order not to become an unsanitary nuisance. And the restrooms or the porta potties at Roosevelt Inlet, they are being cleaned regularly. You know, again, I think that the issue of restrooms is a different discussion that we're hearing more and more needs to happen. Lori Amalia, what is being done to address the overdevelopment in Lewis causing some of the parking problems? So Lewis is relatively built out, so there's not a whole lot of land left to develop. I think a lot of the area around Lewis is also developing very, very rapidly. And that is in the county's jurisdiction. So we're not in a position to be able to really address that. David Fogg asks, could Charlie please clarify again the criteria for parking spot colors, red, yellow, and no parking?
Yes, will do. So no parking areas where there are no parking spaces delineated. Those were areas where there were existing mailboxes, light poles, utility poles, fire hydrants, trash enclosures, driveways, or no parking areas that are designated by existing signage. So there were existing, major items that were in those spaces that wouldn't allow that a 9 by 18 parking space to be placed there. The yellow spaces are spaces that are delineated inside the city's right of way, but where there is existing landscaping, trees, bushes, low-lying vegetation, or hardscaping. Sometimes there's walkways from somebody's front door all the way out to the road, or landscape ties or concrete landscape borders that are in those cities right away. But you could put a parking space if some of that hardscape or landscaping would be removed. So those are the yellow ones. The red ones are delineated in spaces where none of those existed, whether there's mailboxes, light poles, utility poles, hydrants, or landscaping or hardscaping. So they're just clear areas where parking spaces could fit inside the cities right away. I hope that answers the question a little better.
Thank you. Okay. So, so we have Marshall from 4 Milford Avenue asks, do you have any idea whether the new homeowners in the extensive developments opposite the high school is increasing the parking congestion at Lewis Beach? Should non-Lewis homeowners or visitors pay a substantially higher daily fee? I'm sure that the development that's around us is increasing some of the demand, but we have not, without going out and surveying people and figuring out where they're coming from, we don't have definitive data on that. And again, differential fees for residents versus non-residents, or property owners and residents versus non-property owners and residents, is certainly something we could look at. Can you request a zone? From Debbie Mellor. The answer is yes. So the idea is, if you live on Rhode Island Avenue, for instance, and you want to be in that zone, that zone would have a number and you would purchase a permit for that zone. Kristen Mowry, back to the beach capacity question. Is there a way to determine what that is? We can certainly look at other beach communities in other states to determine what mechanisms have been used. But I think my question would be, to what end are we doing that if we don't have a way of controlling how many people go out to the beach? So that's, I think it's certainly something, I'm sure that there are researchers out there that have ways to do it, but I guess, one, what's the cost of doing it? And two, what does it give us if we don't have a way to manage it? But it's certainly something that has been discussed and that we can look more closely at. Mina and Greg Clark, we are concerned that the porta potties still do not serve the capacity issue. There have been folks changing clothes on the street outside their cars. Has the parking committee considered the constraints of capacity relative to facilities and this consideration? And again, I think the whole one of the purposes of a parking permit system is that it manages the number of people that you have coming to park there. It reduces the likelihood that people are going to come park there because they have to pay to park at the lots. So hopefully it would cut down on some of those behaviors. Mary Jean Gilligan, if you have a daily pass, what hours does it cover? So our parking enforcement hours are 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. J.R. Futcher asked to the Bike and Peg Committee, would you care to speak with Lewis Beach residents about racks and their impacts on natural habitat? I think we can look at placing racks in areas where it would not adversely affect current vegetation. Marshall, and looking at the delineation of parking spaces, it seems you have crammed far too many spaces into Lewis Beach. I would urge you to accommodate fast-growing demand via parking lots in town with fee-based bus service and reduce the number of delineated spaces by 50% to approximately 250. This would make a big improvement in the quality of life for Lewis Beach residents. You know, again, I do think a lot of the yellow spaces may end up falling out, and where some of the comments that have come in where people are going to provide their addresses and there's a conflict, we'll look at that. So it will come down some, but I think, again, I think based on the way people have been parking in recent years, I think this is likely still a reduction. And ultimately, mayor and council will need to determine, you know, do they want to reduce the potential inventory?
Anne-Marie, can I respond to that a little bit too? And just to remind everyone that there's a significant demand for parking in the downtown area for the use of the downtown, you know, commercial businesses and homes, et cetera. So it would be maybe difficult to create some sort of additional parking spaces with a shuttle to the beach, you know, per that comment, just because parking spaces downtown are already at a premium.
Right. Abby Woods says, requiring parking fees may lead visitors to think the beaches are guarded. Lifeguards may divert unwanted behaviors such as cases of beer and the rowdy games and behaviors that negatively impact other beachgoers and residents. Again, I think the issue of whether and how much we expand the guarded beach is something we can have that conversation. I think, you know, perhaps what we need to do is make sure that we have a sign that says, you know, place signs that say unguarded beach, swimming at your risk, or something to that effect in the areas that are not guarded. J.R. Futcher asks, what about turning radius on avenues? I think what she's going back to the bike racks, and I think that if that's correct, we're not going to place bike racks without in a way that would adversely affect turning radii. So we will any of those types of things would be looked at. Jack Siegfried, we live on the corner of Cedar and Laurel. The map shows 10 red slots facing our private side porch. Please consider parallel spaces instead of facing 10 as a lot. I also see other spots on the beach with that many places near a private home. So so let's make a note.
Yeah,
Someone,
I've got that noted.
Okay.
I've got that noted. Yeah.
Sumner Crosby, he says he has a lot of questions, or he has a series of questions. So what I would say is, oh, never mind. He did put them. I was going to say, if you could put them in the Q&A. So Lee McKenna says, for those of us who thought this began at 7 and did not realize about the 5:30 start time, could you summarize what has been discussed, questions answered? Oh, and then at the end it says you don't need to read this, sorry. So that's why it's shortly after 7, I kind of went through the website again. Boy, to try to summarize everything, I mean, I think we will definitely be putting something out that kind of wraps all of this up and explains, but a lot of what we've heard relate to, you know, specific conflicts on properties, a lot of concerns about lack of restrooms, concerns about making sure that Lewis residents get first cut at permits. And any other things coming to your mind, folks? Because I know some of you have been taking notes. Oh, good point. It's being recorded and we're going to put it on YouTube. So thank you, Janelle. So if you don't want me to read a question out loud, put that at the beginning because apparently I'll get to that at the end. Sumner Crosby asks, is there a maximum number of permits that we would imagine issuing? And if so, how do we imagine allocating them? Would there be some sort of limit per household? So based on the number of delineated spaces we end up with, we will look to our parking permit management company, IPS, who does all of our parking meters, and look for their recommendations. Typically, with a parking permit system, you have an inventory of parking spaces, and there are certain thresholds for you can oversell it by X%. So we would look for their expertise to help us determine how many permits we would offer based on how many spaces we end up delineating. One of the questions is, should the permits be open to Lewis residents or also to people beyond Lewis? So that would help to control the number. I would think that we would start with some sort of limit per household. If you have specific comments on any of those things, I would suggest please put them in your comment form, because again, we really want the feedback from the community so that we can try to get this as right as possible when we present something to mayor and council. Barbara O'Hanlon said the description of cost of parking permits does not clarify who will be charged for the parking permit. Residents, non-residents, both, please specify. So, the question we're asking is what do you believe would be reasonable for you to pay for a permit? So, some people have said very clearly they do not believe residents should have to pay for a permit. So you can answer that, or you can put in your comments what you think, or you can put in the comments that you think out of city residents should pay more than Lewis residents. Whatever it is that you want, but as it relates to the cost of the permit, answer that as if it were you paying for that permit. Sean Coughlin, what are the goals of the parking changes? I understand it will bring order to parking, but will it limit or increase parking? Charlie and Sherry, you guys have looked at the delineation and numbers, and what are your thoughts? I don't think it increases.
I would say it limits it to the actual spaces delineated, whatever's eventually decided by this committee and city council. And it's not increasing spaces because we've actually not shown spaces where we know people are parking right now, fitting themselves into a place that's not really a parking space.
So, and that, right. And I mean, I think part of kind of the chaos that we see in terms of parking is there are a lot of places that are not legitimate parking spaces that are not signed as no parking. So it's not, we can't ticket them for parking there. So yeah, I think what this does more than anything is limit. Sumner Crosby asks, on the delineation question, your choice includes an option of signs only. Would there be signs for every space as the images portray them, no matter what? It wouldn't be for every space. It would be for a span of spaces. So if there are 6 spaces, one after the other, you'd have signs, at the end, or no parking sign. But we wouldn't have them for every space. Pamela Luce, when calculating the number of parking spaces on Lewis Beach, was there any consideration as to how many people the beach can accommodate at high tide? And the short answer to that is no. But many comments that we've heard this evening do relate to somehow determining and managing capacity. And I apologize for those of you who have been on for a long time, so you've heard me say this a few times. Even if we get a formula to determine carrying capacity of the beach, we don't have a mechanism for limiting the number of people going out to the beach. So capacity, the main thing with this project is bringing order to the parking. So we're not trying to bring more people in. We're not trying to maximize to the greatest extent possible the number of people that can park here. We're trying to make it so that that the people who are coming here know where they can legally park, and they're not necessarily, in some cases, they're not deciding that they're not going to park at Savannah or Johnny Walker Beach because they don't want to pay the $2 an hour. So they're going to go park on Ohio Avenue because it's free. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. Chris Tawa, our lot has been identified as potentially being reduced to create 2 parking spaces. If that is done, we will no longer have a 50 by 100 conforming lot. How do you plan to address that issue for a future buyer of my property? Will the city issue a blanket zoning variance? Your lot itself will not be affected. The right of way on these streets goes beyond the paved area. All of the parking that's shown is on private or on the public right of way, not on the private property. So we are not reducing anybody's lot size. Jason Christman, I am a Lewis Beach property owner and plan to redevelop my property and may reorient the location of my driveway. Currently, there are 5 parking spaces planned around my lot that would impede my plans. Will the city of Lewis accommodate future parking space changes? And I would say yes. As lots redevelop, we would work with property owners to address driveway location. Sumner Crosby asked, what role do you see bicycles playing, and do you intend to set up racks either by Dune, Bay Avenue, or on the paper streets? So we have seen an increase in bicycle traffic on all of the streets in that area. Bay Avenue is a multimodal street, so bikes and pedestrians can go either way, and cars can only go one way. There have been recommendations to increase the number of bike racks, and I expect it, and we are looking at that, but we're looking at that separately from this. Stephanie Volturo, can you please show one of the parking maps again and briefly explain the yellow and red spaces and how we can tell what would and would not be a parking space? So I'm going to.
Emery, I just scrolled ahead a little bit and she mentioned that her red and yellow spot question has been answered, I think, from the last time I summarized it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Sumner Crosby, I assume whatever you do, there will need to be some sort of information campaign. Absolutely. Especially for visitors, renters, etc. How do you hope to meet this need? We will, we'll have to do signage. We will have to make sure that all of the real estate agents know anybody who holds a rental permit or license. Yes, there will need to be outreach. Obviously, we would, the local media would cover it. We would look to them as well. So yes, we do realize there does need to be robust public communication on this. Deborah Burns. I read the AH twice. Deborah Burns, has the city decided we will pay for a permit? If so, as other local towns do not charge? And that's Mike Burns. So we have not determined with certainty that there will be a charge. I think it's highly likely, but ultimately that would be a decision for mayor and council. Sumner Crosby, having lived off Cedar for years past Children's Beach House, I believe there's a need to slow down traffic, particularly during busy weekends. Have you considered either a seasonal or perhaps a permanent reduction in the speed limit along Cedar? That is a Del Dot road, and I do not believe that they would allow us to go below 25. Also, I don't think that the problem is cars going 25. I think that the problem is when people are going faster, probably 35 and up. And we do that is one of the areas where we have targeted speed enforcement. And I expect that we would continue that. Barry Lambertson, if a Lewis Beach property does not have a driveway for off-street parking, will there be 2 permits for those homes free of charge? We have not determined yet how we would accommodate those homes that do not have off-street parking, but we do know, and we've heard a number of comments, that we will need to make accommodations for homes that do not have off-street parking. Greg Greenwald, the red and yellow space indicators on the map look like they are on private property. Is this the case? No, all of those are on public right of way. The right of way goes beyond the pavement. So it is beyond the pavement, but it is not on private property. Richard Nichols, what is the specific target of parking spots being looked for? We don't have a target of how many we're looking for. Sherry, you said 576?
Great.
573. That's what we have total right now, red and yellow. Mhm.
But that is likely to change based on the feedback we're receiving. Lewis Beach Civic Association, I believe it was stated that if all of the proposed parking spaces are utilized, there would be 573 places on Lewis Beach. There are well over 600 homes in the area you are considering. How many permits do you intend to sell? Again, the number of permits will be based on the feedback from the professionals that deal with parking permit systems. But I think that comment underscores that, I mean, there have been several comments, questions about would each Lewis Beach property owner get permits. You know, again, if there's over 600, if there's over 600 properties on Lewis Beach and there's less than 600 spaces, I don't think we can make the assumption that everybody who owns a house on Lewis Beach will get a permit. I mean, there is a lot of off-street parking that again, anything that's been built anytime recently is required to have 2, and most exceed that. Richard Nichols asked, what is the target duration of this issue, May 30th through August 31st? Our parking season is actually May 1st through September 30th on Lewis Beach. Barry Lambertson, on Laurel Avenue, our property at 5 Laurel Avenue, there are 10 designated spaces. The driveway we put in ourselves and maintain ourselves without any help from the city. We understand that there is room for additional parking along Laurel Avenue, but it seems really tight and we'd like to see it reduced to 60, or sorry, not 66, at a diagonal instead of straight in parking. So I see our engineer taking notes on that one.
Yeah, we have that.
Barry Lambertson, why aren't the paper streets being considered for additional parking? I think some of them were.
Some of them were, but a lot of them were turned over to open space many years, not many years ago, a few years ago. So those that have been rezoned to open space, they can no longer be used that way. They're not actually paper streets anymore.
Okay, correct. Okay. And again, if mayor and council want to look at converting some of those to parking, we could look at that. But again, we were not coming into this with, we're trying to find every possible place where parking could happen. We were trying to kind of manage what we have. Brian North, we live year round on Milton Avenue and have frequent family visitors during the summer season. We understand that Rehoboth provides 2 transferable seasonal parking permits to its property owners without charge. Has there been any thought given to that for us? You know, I think the Lewis Beach Civic Association question kind of underscores the supply and demand issue we have. If we've got at most 600 or 573 spaces and 600 residential properties on Lewis Beach, and we want to make sure that people who live in Lewis, outside of the Lewis Beach area, have access to parking. If you do the math, you know, we're going to have to figure that out. But I don't expect that we are going to say that all property owners would be able to have 2 free permits. Again, just because the supply is not there. Joseph Smith, the town needs to remove obstructions and create parking in the yellow spaces. Otherwise, streets with no obstructions will unfairly have to accommodate more day visitors. Mr. Smith, if you could just make sure that you put that, submit that in the comments on the website. I just don't know from a record standpoint if Zoom saves the Q&A. So, Bobby Birch, do you understand that this is a residential area? Your earlier comment that Cape Shores is private and much of the rest of the discussion is problematic. We realize folks would like to enjoy the beach. There is Cape Henlopen and metered lots. We live here and our homes are private too. Will you consider this, please? I think we are trying to consider this. I think, you know, they are public streets. People are parking there now. What we're looking at is trying to bring some structure to how that's done. So again, if we just stop where we are now and do anything, we still have all of those issues that people are concerned about with people blocking driveways, blocking mailboxes, you know, doing inappropriate things in the public. And this is an attempt to try to manage at least some of those conflicts, like blocking driveways, blocking mailboxes, and just parking in every place that looks open. Janice Alamaris, I want to make sure I understand it. If I have guests for a dinner party at my house, and if all the space around my house is permit parking, my guests will need to get a permit. The parking permits would be till 8 p.m. We don't enforce parking after 8 p.m. So it is possible. You know, I know I have family who live in areas, urban areas that have parking permits, and they purchase permits. And if they're having a dinner party, they, you know, you pull up, you go in and get the permit, and then you go find a spot. 1602 Cedar, Sean Coughlin. I was looking for a final report of the beach parking committee on the city website and could not find one. Was it produced? Yes, it was, and it is on the attached to the minutes from, I think, February 11th of 2021. But we will put both reports on the page with the parking workshop. Okay. David Siritsky, maybe? I hope I said that okay. Where would the cluster mailboxes be placed? At corners? I think most likely at corners. I think we'd have to work with the Postal Service to see where they would place them. It could be that they would be on Cedar at the head of the street. But all of that would have to go through the Postal Service. Stephanie Volturo, for East Canal Avenue, there are only 4 red spots. The corner of her property is covered by the street name, so she assumes there are no spots there. Is that correct, Charlie or Sherry? Are you able to determine that?
Yeah, let me check here. You said East Canal, correct? So that's on EX5. That is correct. There are spaces underneath the label that says East Canal Avenue. There are 4 red spaces on East Canal Avenue.
So I guess Stephanie, if when you're submitting your comments, if you're used to seeing more cars parked on the street, that might be worth noting, and we have to figure out where they park. Ellen Brotman, I'm joining late, but my questions are these. How many public parking spaces are there on Lewis Beach and how many are needed? Has anyone done a study of what the beach capacity is? So first on the capacity, we have not done a study on beach capacity. Even if we were to do a study on beach capacity, because we don't have a mechanism of restricting people from going on the beach, we don't have a way to say, you know, you can or can't go on the beach, it's full at that capacity. So as it relates to how many public parking spaces, on the delineation maps, there are between the red and the yellow combined, a total of 573. So that number is likely to change based on the comments that we get. And really, again, we're not looking to add to the parking inventory. We're looking to manage the parking and to bring order and structure to the system. Dan Austin of Missouri Avenue, how many additional spaces in total would be created if the yellow spaces become parking spaces? I'm concerned that Lewis Beach, being a finite resource, could be overwhelmed during the summer months. Is there a detailed capacity that shows how many people the beach can accommodate during peak time? Where can I find the capacity plan? So again, we do not have a capacity plan. Sherry, can you let us know how many are yellow, how many are red? But while she's getting ready to share that, many of those yellow spaces are used for parking. So this is not, the yellow spaces are not adding parking. It's in some cases, you know, when we see parking in delineating one, it would be clear where the wheels are supposed to go. Right now, there are times where people will park on either side of the street, but they're parked on the asphalt, and it's very difficult for a car, much less an emergency vehicle, to get through. The yellow and red combined is still a reduction in what can be parked in the current haphazard system. So Sherry, do you want to answer the number question now?
So again, there's 573 spaces total. There are 176 spaces which are yellow and 397 spaces which are red.
Thank you. And then the next question was, what do the white stripes on the map indicate?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm not sure of where those white stripes are on the maps. I kind of went through the maps. There might be some existing white striping for parking spaces on private property or beach parking or the Savannah Beach parking lot. That might be a question about the fly-throughs for the parking delineation types, whether it's flexible bollards or landscape ties or rubber. And we do show those landscape ties with little white stripes out on the road to better indicate, but those are more related to the red or yellow stripes
Right, okay.
or parking spaces, sorry.
Kevin McGinnis says currently most visitors who park on Cedar have 2 tires on the shoulder and the other 2 on the grass, dirt, etc. If you look at the map, it appears that the proposed public spots would not allow for any parking on the shoulders. This would appear to mean that the entire permissible parking spot would be in the right of way and closer to the home. Is that correct? That is how it's depicted now. We have received comments about that, and that is something that, you know, as we look at the comments, we will probably go back and look at exactly that, doing more what people are doing now with 2 wheels on the road and two wheels off the road.
Anne Marie, I would only caution that, you know, we have to also consider the issue of bicyclists and pedestrians using that
Right.
shoulder too. So that's an issue.
Right, so that's another thing that we've heard quite a bit of this evening. Jason Christman, the intersection of Cedar and California often has a large pond due to pooling rainwater. The parking spaces will be submerged. Will the drainage issue be addressed or parking spaces changed? You know, again, those parking spaces are utilized now. You know, even the area in front of the Children's Beach House, if we have a large rain event, or while they're heavily used with a large rain event, they're not. I guess the good news there is when there's a large rain event, there's usually not a lot of people coming to park to go to the beach. So, you know, ideally, I mean, again, I think the demand for parking reduces when there's a rain event, but we are not looking at removing things because it's an area that has ponding, and we are not addressing stormwater with this. We know that there are stormwater issues in that area. I have talked to Austin Calaman about maybe working on a scope of a project to look at stormwater on Lewis Beach, because we don't have a standard stormwater system, and look to see if there are some retrofits we could do to manage some of the water. But that would be, again, a separate project. Keena Ross, observing the beach, bay to dune crowding on a high summer weekend. It appears that our current parking capacity self-limits beach goer capacity. How many additional spaces beyond what was available in 2021 are seen to be needed? We are not adding. We're not adding any spaces to the inventory. If anything, we are seeing the number go down based on taking spaces that really were never intended to parking, and by delineating, taking them out of the inventory. Barbara O'Hanlon, what are the plans for enforcement of the parking permit? This new policy is only as good as enforcement. I look forward to hearing about the staffing plan, cars versus bike patrol. Dennis Crawford is our parking enforcement supervisor, and his team has been out enforcing parking on the Lewis Beach streets, and I think he can better address how they're planning to get to this.
We'll continue to do what we've been doing is we randomly drive through the entire area, depending upon the day of the week and the time of the year, is the number of times that we go through there. But we typically have 1 to 2 people dedicated to enforcement in that area right now. And if I'd have known that was going to be a question, I would have told you how many citations that we really issued in that area this last year. It was quite a few. We issued quite a few citations for people who were not parking properly and creating safety problems. And we'll continue to do this level of enforcement.
Thank you, Dennis. Ellen Brotman asks, is your goal to limit the parking? How many spots are you hoping to create? Again, we're looking to manage. So we're not looking to create or reduce, we're looking to manage and to bring structure to parking so that there's a general order to where people can park, and hopefully, you know, that will lend itself to maybe some of the undesirable behaviors being reduced as well. Dan Austin asked, what will happen to people's encroachments that overlay the yellow spaces? Will they be removed by the city or the resident, and who pays the cost? You know, again, we are pretty cautious about how we deal with the encroachments. So for those yellow spaces, we'll be evaluating. It could be a matter of trimming back shrubs. It could, you know, it could be something small, and I would say the city would be responsible for that. But you know, we aren't going to do it without talking to the adjacent owners. Greg Greenwald, have you evaluated putting speed bumps on Cedar to control speed? That is a DelDOT. Well, one, we don't allow speed bumps on city streets, but that's also a DelDOT street. And I'm confident that DelDOT would not allow speed bumps either. Deborah Evalds, listening to concerns here with porta potties, number of visitors, etc. And it seems that many concerns could be addressed by eliminating the discussion of daily passes and perhaps reconsidering weekly passes. As Lewis Beach is primarily a residential area, perhaps only season passes should be made available. I also agree that City of Lewis residents must have the first option on passes, and there should be City of Lewis residents / taxpayers versus non-resident county taxpayer fees. Overall, as a taxpayer in the City of Lewis, I support seasonal parking passes, but not additional services at Lewis Beach. I do not support increasing lifeguards or adding more bathhouses. Lewis Beach must have its character preserved. Part of that is the walk to the bathhouses or the inlet. Thanks for addressing this pressing issue. Parking crowds were out of control in recent years. So again, Deborah, we would love to have you put your comments in the comment form, just so we make sure that it does get captured. Jennifer Demery, or actually, no, Brian Hobbs, 108 New Jersey Avenue. Will parking enforcement be on foot patrol during enforcement hours, or will LPD respond to potential violations? Our parking enforcement will be driving around in their electric vehicle and will get out of the car and walk a block or two when needed, but they will it will be done by parking enforcement. Ellen Brotman, what is your plan for dealing with encroachments in the right of way? People have built their homes and received approval for these builds from the city, and now apparently to suffer serious consequences with encroachments being removed. What notice will people get of the removal of these encroachments? We're not planning to go through and do any massive removing of encroachments with this. You know, again, it would be more smaller vegetation, you know, things, and certainly homes are not part of encroachments. And to the degree that there are any older homes that might have encroachments, those, you know, again, we're not looking at touching any of that, any large trees or anything like that. Greg Greenwald, a designated red parking location in front of our property would block mail carrier vehicle access to our mailbox, 11 New Jersey. Could that be looked at as a space to remove?
Yep,
Yes, I know we, go ahead, Charlie.
I have that noted and we'll take a look at that.
If you are submitting questions as an anonymous attendee, you need to put your name, because we cannot, under FOIA, allow for a public meeting anonymous comments. Nina and Greg Clark, where does one find where open space has been designated versus a paper street? We're very concerned about not having a parking lot installed next to our house due to the location of our property adjacent to one. if you could submit something in the comment, we'll look at that and we can get back to you. And let you know. Again, at this point, we're not showing the paper streets or the open space. Marcy Saliba, if there are currently spots on a street, but they are not marked in the red map, will these spots be illegal during the season? In other words, if a spot is not marked, does that mean no parking allowed? And that is correct. So if there's something that's used as a space that is not on our map, that's something you might want to point out as well. Okay. Chris Tawa, follow up to my previous question about conforming lots if new parking spaces are created out of my front yard. As with many of the beach lots, our surveyor started measuring our lot from a point that overlaps the city's right-of-way area. Thus, if parking spaces are created, we will no longer have a 50 by 100 lot. How do you plan to address this? Again, we're not changing property lines. What I would say is if you have a survey that shows that your property goes further than that it conflicts with the city's right of way, we would need to see that survey to see what's going on there. Greg, oh, I'm sorry. Hold on, I'm sorry, Greg Greenwald, have you considered allowing public permitted parking on Cedar and resident only on the side streets? We haven't, but again, submit that in your comments. I don't see anything off the table at this point. Joseph Smith, can we change the parking permit time to stop at 6 p.m. versus 8 p.m. to accommodate dinner guests? Again, put that in. I don't have any reason that we couldn't. I mean, just because the parking lots go till 8 doesn't mean that this would need to go till 8. So again, I encourage you to submit that comment, and I'm sure our staff's writing it down as well. Janice Alamaris, is your goal to structure parking? Why not just delineate spots? This plan seems to focus on revenue generation while having a negative impact on beach residents that we consider in a residential area. That is a possibility. We were asked, the task that was assigned to us was to develop a permit system. We can delineate without doing permits, but I think that many of the influx of parking from elsewhere would still continue to happen. So, this is why we're doing the outreach. We do want to hear your perspective on that. And if you prefer to have delineation without permits, please submit that in your comments. David Saratsky, I'm sorry, I keep saying your name wrong. I've seen signs saying resident parking only in front of some houses on Lewis Beach. Are these signs just ad hoc put up by property owners if they want it, or if they want to, or is there some process for obtaining permission to put up a sign? Will this change with the new proposed parking scheme? There are, I think, 3 or 5 locations where those signs exist, and those are locations where it is a full-time resident and there's no off-street parking, and that was approved by mayor and council a number of years ago. So again, we would need to, any proposal we put forward will have to deal with how we address lots with no off-street parking, which would include those. Deborah Ziegler, on the corner of Bayview Avenue and Bay Avenue and Market Street, there is a property that has a white description on it that says museum guest parking only. What does this description refer to? I'm going to ask one of our GMB folks.
I think museum might be a mistake. I don't recall exactly what the sign says, but I know those spaces are for the condo that's right there at that same corner and reserved for them.
I believe there was a sign that said something about museum parking only, or, yeah, I don't recall the exact verbiage on the sign, but
There's a guest cottage or something, so I think there's a guest cottage on that. Oh, I see it. Museum guest parking. Okay, yeah. We'll have to look at that again. Ellen Brotman says, you keep saying that this is less parking than is currently used. How much less? So it's hard to say because it hasn't been delineated before, and parking has happened in a lot of places that aren't legal spaces. But Charlie and Sherry, I mean, if you guys have looked at the delineation, you know, backwards, forwards, and inside out. Do you want to address that?
I'd only be estimating, but I'd say there's probably something like 50 to 100 spaces less than what might be used today.
And again, that's based on, you know, kind of cars being parked in a lot of places that may not be safe, that could have other conflicts. Robin Keener from Lewis Beach. I went to the form questions to give my input. I didn't find it user friendly. Is there another way to ask questions or make suggestions? You can always just send an email to myself or Janelle. So we can put our email, or Janelle's typing a response. Kath McGinnis, earlier during this workshop, I thought Sherry had said the new parking map increased spots by 176. These are the yellow spaces which will be evaluated. Those aren't increased. A lot of these places have had parking on them, but the parking's kind of been in a haphazard way. Sherry, do you want to?
yeah, I did want to say something on that. So the 176 spaces that we're talking about, those are total parking spaces, which are shown in yellow, which means the yellow, again, is delineating parking spaces that currently have right-of-way encroachments, such as landscaping or shrubbery or hardscaping, if you will. So they're not additional spaces by any means.
Okay, thank you. Again, we've got another comment in here from somebody that says anonymous attendee. We are not answering any questions that say anonymous. So if your question isn't answered, that might be why. So make sure that your name is associated with your question. Linda Blumner asks, will parking enforcement have the authority to ticket cars that idle in accordance with the Delaware idling law? That's one question. And then that parking on Bayview is 6 feet from the screen porches where we take most of our meals and relaxation. So again, Linda, I would say for that second part, submit that in your comments. And Lieutenant Izzato, do you want to address the idling law question?
Sure. Our parking enforcement enforce the city code. It would be the police officers that enforce Title 21, which is where the idling vehicle statute would be located.
Thank you. Deborah Evalds is asking to Dennis Crawford. So Dennis, get ready. Could permits make enforcement easier for traffic officers? Could cell phone numbers be required when permits are issued so officers could call permit holders to remove their vehicle if there are blocked driveways or serious encroachments?
Well, you know, absolutely. When we set up the permit system, there'll be certain protocols and things that will have to be done. And we probably will be asking for a phone number for the permit holder in case we, you know, need to call them. And we also accept phone calls. I know this past year, I received a lot of phone calls from the residents down there who had a parking issue with someone parking illegally, blocking their driveway, and we would go down and issue citations to those folks.
Thank you. Barry Lambertson. I previously asked why the paper streets were not being considered, and I believe the comment was made that some of the paper streets were designated. However, I looked at the maps and it appears all of the paper streets are considered open space. Why is that? So so you're looking at the former paper streets, and the streets were abandoned in, I think, 2017 or 18, and kind of absorbed into the lot that is the marsh there, and then they were subsequently rezoned to open space. So those that were considered open space, we were not entertaining for parking.
Anne Marie, just to clarify further, that is why a street like Laurel Avenue did show up on this parking plan, because it was not rezoned to open space at that time. Several of them were like that, but most of them were rezoned to open space at that time.
Thank you. Okay, Julie and Will. What if your proposed parking space blocks our current parking area that we have landscaped for our family's parking? We will not block any driveways. If you're using something other than a driveway for a parking area, you know, again, you're entitled to a 20-foot driveway. If you're using a landscaped area that's not part of your driveway, we're not going to be able to control for that. Deborah Ziegler, the property with the description of museum guest parking is 130 Bay Avenue. This is a unit with 8 condos and surrounding parking spaces in a parking lot. So yeah, so that's just a labeling issue. We'll fix that. Are all proposed, Dan Austin, are all proposed parking spots in compliance with laws? Needed distance from stop signs? Anything, and we consulted with the police department on this, anything that is fully off of the roadway. So if it's in the right of way grassed area, you do not, it can be within that 30 feet. Lieutenant, is that correct? Oh, you're muted.
That is correct.
So if a change is made where they're shifted over to where it's entirely or partially on the asphalt, then that 30 feet would come into play. Kristen Demes, we park our cars on our property on the side yard off of a former paper street, but it's not a formal driveway, just grass. Will this be permitted? If you're parking it on your property, yes. If you're parking it on the paper street, no. So that that's the answer to that question. So Dan Austin said, I'm happy to hear that Charlie estimated the total number of proposed parking spaces are 50 to 100 less than being used today. That would help the parking issues we've seen in summer months. Does our surveyor, Sherry, agree with that assessment? So Sherry's not a surveyor, but Sherry, you can answer that question.
I really think it's hard to estimate how many fewer spaces. I mean, obviously there isn't a lot of order right now to the parking down there. So people, it really is a free for all. People are parking in areas that aren't necessarily safe, or parking in ways that aren't necessarily safe, such as head in instead of parallel. So there's definitely a significant amount being eliminated in the areas that were head in that we're now showing as parallel, which would be down closer to the Roosevelt Inlet and the Children's Beach House areas. So it is hard to estimate an exact number. That's definitely something that we can look into. You know, if that's a number that people want to see, we could estimate that.
Thank you, Sherry. Janie Warren and Bob Payne, when we pull out from side streets, either Rhode Island or New Hampshire avenues, we have difficulty seeing out onto Cedar Street to pull out safety with cars parked on Cedar Avenue. Just urging to be mindful of safety so that we can pull out onto Cedar in a safe manner. So that's part of the reason where that 30-foot area is striped. And I know in this last year when we have had parking enforcement out there, when people have been parked on the asphalt within the 30 feet of the stop sign, which obstructs visibility also, they have addressed that. So, you know, again, we certainly understand that concern. I think our questions that are in there are currently answered. There are a few that are just comments, a few that are anonymous, but I think that they've already been answered anyway. Is there anything else? Does anyone want to put their hand up and ask any questions? Anything? All right, so here's where we are. The activities and the comments are open until close of business, which would be 4 o'clock, but really we'll make it 4:30 because some of us are here till 4:30. The building closes at 4. We'll make it 4:30 on Friday, January 28th. At 4:30 on January 28th, we will make the site not live anymore. We will begin going through all of your comments and you know, trying to sort through and find common themes and go from there. Our plan is to present this to Mayor and City Council at the February 14th meeting. I do see Mike Savage has his hand up. So Mike, you should be able to unmute.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I was just typing it in. Just can you clarify? I've heard you a couple of times talk about open space and parking. Can you just clarify what are the rules right now for parking and open in those areas that have been designated as open space?
So at this point in time, there is no prohibition. In this project, we have not designated those or delineated those as parking areas. So in that case, they would become no parking unless we were to change that and delineate parking there.
Okay, so that would be a change. And okay, because right now I know that, in fact, one of the police officers told someone, because I live next to one, that they could park there. And
Yeah.
I was surprised at that because I didn't think they could.
Yeah, right now they can.
Okay.
You know, and again, that will be a change. And I mean, we've got people who are accustomed to parking there. So I expect to hear some comments regarding that as well. I haven't seen any yet, but they've been flying in all evening, so.
Well, I'll certainly put in my vote that they can't park there, but yes,
Okay.
they can limit that. So I would
All right.
not appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, can you hear me?
Yep.
Just to say, nice job, everyone. I mean, you've been doing, and Anne Marie, you've been answering these questions, some of them redundantly for quite a while. So I appreciate your patience and all with all of our questions, because sometimes it is hard to follow the answers and the comments, but we do appreciate your patience. And it seems like everyone is really dedicated to really trying to resolve a very complicated situation.
Thank you. And thank you for hanging in, because you've been in here since 5:15 too, I think.
Yes, I have. Yeah, I've been hanging in listening. Yes, I have. Yeah.
You know, for everybody who has given so much of your time this evening to this session, and then also spent time on the website, we do want to thank you, because this truly, we're really working to bring forward something that reflects your interests and that helps to resolve your problems, not make them worse. So, do we have more? Oh, okay, so we do have, so Abby Wood says, where will the passes be dispersed from? And I would expect that we would sell them at City Hall and the police station, and possibly, Dennis, the parking guard shack.
Yes, we could sell them down there.
And some of that depends on whether it's just seasonal or if we add the daily and weekly as well. And when do we, Beth Galeen asks, when do we expect to implement a plan? If all goes well, we would look to implement it this coming parking season. So it really depends on the nature of the comments. You know, if we're going back to the drawing board, that may take longer. But the hope is that we have something that we can implement this parking season. All right. Well, thank you all. It has been a pleasure, and I may be hoarse tomorrow from talking for 3 hours straight, but thank you all for participating. Thank you to our team who really has put in a ton of work over the last year. And we look forward to reading all of your comments. Thank you.